Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. Welcome everybody who's here. Welcome everybody online. Thank you so much for coming and for tuning in, whether physically or online. My name is Nichinda, and tonight I have the tremendous honor of welcoming Mykki Blanco, who is a rapper, performance artist, poet, and activist. During this interview, we would like to touch on some subjects like choosing families, maneuvering the entertainment industry as queer and non-binary person, and the changes that Mykki has seen in their career regarding the acceptance of queer people and their liberation. So again, I would like to welcome Mykki Blanco, and thank you so much for coming.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello, hello. Mykki, I can tell you there's a lot of excitement on this end in Rotterdam over your arrival. It's fully sold out, and I saw some other people sneaking in as well.
That's really cool, guys. Hi, I guess I could have been there in person, but I think at the time that we started talking about this situation, there were still COVID restrictions in place, and we weren't really sure how we were going to navigate that. But I'm happy to be here digitally.
Exactly, that's great. First, I would just like to ask you, what does being in community and having, for example, a queer or chosen family, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think like so many people, community is really important because, I'm 35, I turned 35 this year, and when I think about who I was at 20 years old or who I was at 19 years old, there's a commonality that I share with many, queer people, which is, I was raised in the countryside, and then, when we left the countryside, I was raised in a suburb of San Francisco. And so both places were removed from these urban centers. And, and I think that, there's this commonality where usually in most countries, in most places, there's a higher concentration of queer people in the urban center, right?
Exactly.
And so, when I was 16 years old, actually, when I was 16 years old, I got into I got into anarchist punk, and I got into kind of this like anti-fascist movement. And an anarchist movement, and that's when I had really discovered things like queercore, which was this kind of punk queer movement of the '90s, and this was the early 2000s, by the way. But this queercore was this movement of the early '90s, and that's when I first discovered feminism. And so I actually when I was 16, I ran away from home to New York City, thinking that I was gonna find this chosen family, and at the time I was too young to be able to actually articulate that, but that's what I was really looking for. I remember I wrote my mom this really long letter after I had stolen the equivalent of 100 euros from her wallet, and my letter said, Mom, I'm not leaving you. I'm not upset at the family. I don't want you guys to think that I'm leaving because I'm rebelling, but I'm going to find my community. I'm going to find my group of artists. I'm going to find people like me. And so, that was something that I did when I was 16 years old. Obviously, I came back home and I ended up finishing school. But I think that one of the first times I really found a community and a queer community is when I had dropped out of art college for the first time in Chicago. And when I dropped out of art college in Chicago, I kind of fell in again with, a more of experimental scene. There were people that were making experimental noise music, that were doing kind of, really transgressive, what I would call like guerrilla drag. People that, were living in punk houses and squats. And this was completely new to me at the time. And that world really, I think, gave me an education in what it is to be in an artist community that has kind of gave me or shaped my perspective for the rest of my adult life.
Wow. So I think it's so interesting the way you speak about this anarcho-feminist subculture. How in that community do you reconcile making community with that ideology? For example, like in the ballroom scene, there's a really hierarchical structure of relating to each other. How does that work in that subculture, in that time in your life?
Well, it's funny that so this is a really good question because it kind of kills a few birds with one stone. A lot of people think that I'm from New York City, but I'm not from New York City. New York City is just where I lived from the age of 22 to 27, and it's where I started making music. And a lot of people assume, because I'm a queer musician of color, that that automatically means that I'm from the ballroom scene, but I'm actually not. And so it was a lot of the ideology of kind of like anti-fascism and anarcho-feminism that really shaped a lot of the ideals that ended up coming, creatively to the fore in adulthood. And so, I was so young when I was, when I was absorbing, all of this information. And, it was, this was the first time that I ever had even heard of the word patriarchy, what's so funny is, you can tell that the cultural marker for kind of what people digest in the mainstream has been pushed and accelerated a lot, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. Because I remember, when I was a teenager absorbing this stuff, and then as I got a bit older, you only heard words like patriarchy and intersectionalism in academic circles, You didn't hear these words just kind of like talked about on the internet or, used in speech in a kind of commonplace way like you do now.
Yeah.
And this was kind of like, this was, and I remember even then at that age, the word, intersectionality wasn't used, at least within the circles that I was in at this age. But I remember still kind of that being the first time that people were teaching me and showing me that certain oppressions were interlocked. And once you were exposed to it, it was like, well, duh. But but until you were exposed to it, or until someone had kind of broken things down in a way where you were like, oh wow, that makes a lot of sense, and oh wow, now I'm kind of understanding, why maybe as a child, I was taught to code switch, or why, or why, I'm made to feel like certain things aren't for me, or why so many people seem to have a dislike for when, when anyone is really feminine, or why it seems like everyone always wants to control women, or so it's like when you first get introduced to the reasonings behind some of these things that you've questioned as a child or even as a young adult, and things start to interlock. Yeah, I would say it had a huge influence on me, because the fact that I was able to absorb this kind of information at a younger age, I think really prepared me, and it gave me a lot of armor, which ended up allowing me to make more radical and riskier decisions in my adulthood that at the time felt scary, but that now that I am an adult, I realize really served me.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I do wonder, because the way I imagine, of course, I have this imaginary of you in your early days, right? You in when you were a little bit younger, in your teens, and learning all of this, which at the time may have been really radical, academic, and niche knowledge, or at least the terminology. I think a lot of people, any queer person of color would have understood in an embodied sense their oppression. But all of these terms like intersectionality, becoming now a lot more accessible and a lot more mainstream. How has that impacted you? Because I imagine it would have put you in a kind of niche community at the time, but right now these terms are becoming more and more absorbed into a everyday lingo.
Well, I would say that this question really also applies to the broader sense of my entire career because um, as when I started making music and doing what I do, I feel like a lot of people forget what the world was like 10 years ago. and I think that they do because there's been this acceleration point as far as like how things are consumed online. And I think that with social media and with social networking, taking the kind of really almost like synapsed, way that it has and how we respond to that and how we adapt to that and how we've been trained now by Silicon Valley these last 10 years to adapt to it. I think that people really forget that just 10 years ago, so many things were taboo, so many things were not talked about, and so many so-called tipping points had not yet happened. When I began making music in 2012, the United States had not passed, President Obama had not passed gay marriage. There had not been, so-called, an arguably, it didn't really do anything, but a so-called kind of transgender tipping point, And so a lot of what I represented and a lot of what I did was extremely, extremely taboo. I think more taboo than people realize because most of the websites, most of the media outlets that will gladly now post my music, I never have to name names, but a few of them completely wouldn't. They were afraid it wasn't their target audience. Some people thought that because I was presenting as femme, that automatically meant that it was drag and that it was comedy or that it was frivolous. There were people that understood that it was tied to a trans identity, and that was a huge no-no. So, and it really, and also I think it's really important that I say this. A lot of times, I actually just got asked to do a 40-minute interview about homophobia and transphobia in hip hop. And I refused because I think that entire concept is really racist.
Right.
And I think that concept is very racist because people have a tendency, because of the lyrical content of hip hop, to assume that hip hop and rap music has been more homophobic or has been more transphobic, when in actual truth, all music has been homophobic, has been transphobic. Country western music, pop music, even though pop music has been known to cater to queer anthems, to gay anthems, that still doesn't affect the infrastructure of pop music. That just means that people are capitalizing off of a queer audience. Blues music, jazz music, So even underground experimental music, it's like, a lot of people will say, oh, well, do you think back then it's because hip hop was more homophobic or transphobic back then? And I have to say, honey, all music was quite homophobic and transphobic back then. And we're just talking about 2012. So I needed to add that little bit on because people like to pigeonhole hip hop. And I think they don't realize when they do that, it's very racist.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. How do you reconcile your really, I would say, underground sensibility, your politics with now a continuously growing audience and growing commercial success?
Well, I think two things. I think that when I started, I had come from like this really like art school, arty background. I mean, for the longest time, I thought that I was going to be, a contemporary artist in the very traditional, kind of very rigid sense, where like I would make performance work, and that performance work, would get documented, and that documentation would sell, and I would sell to collectors, and I would exist in the collector gallery system. And through a series of events that were a bit out of my control, I ended up becoming a musician. I didn't start making music till I was 25. So when I look back at certain decisions, that I made or how I approached certain things, it was really, really from this place of someone who was a complete outsider to the music industry. And when I think about, when I did certain projects like Gay Dog Food, which was, my attempt at making a feminist industrial, grunge hip hop mixtape, or when I did Betty Rebel The Initiation, which was my, attempt at making a really goth, really minimal, dark wave, hip hop release. When I think about these kinds of decisions, or when I think about, when I even think about, you know, uh, both Frank Ocean and Lil Nas X were artists that, came out as straight artists, and then only after they had won over the fans, only after they had won certain accolades, did they end up coming out. So many times I thought about, oh wow, what if I had done that? Like, what if I had just kind of come out as this straight dude for 3 years?
Sounds exhausting.
What if I had come out as this straight dude for 3 years, and then all of a sudden told people I was queer, and then everything would be okay, and I would have already garnered all these fans because I had been normal. And so, I think about certain things like this, but then I think, well, because so much of this career has mirrored my real life, and because of the choices that I made, and I've been so blessed to have this really exciting life, I wouldn't want to do anything differently, because the opportunities that I've had, the people that I've worked with, I mean, really early on, getting support from Bjork and MIA, and and having Bjork open, having me open for her, and getting support from a lot of there was a time when, like, I was kind of almost more supported by other really bigger mainstream musicians than I was than when I had fans. And then I think about the weird things that I've done, like working for Kanye, songwriting for Kanye West for a bit, and working with Madonna, and just all of these kind of like and also being able to tour all over the world, because my music was shared on these online communities like Twitter and and Tumblr and Instagram in its earliest version, and how I was able to really navigate and make a living, and make a good living for myself outside of the major label system, because of queer people all over the world saying, we want a Mykki Blanco show. And then people working for that to happen, that journey, and all of those crazy experiences, and all of those shows, and all of those people, and all of those after parties, and all of the art performances, and all of that has been like the cornucopia, the tapestry that's weaved my life together. So I think that even though some people could argue that maybe I've taken the longer road to success, I think the other part of this story that a lot of people maybe don't think about, because why would they, would be that I didn't start making music till I was 25. And when I say that, I mean, like, I really did not start making music till I was 25. And some of my earlier music is almost unlistenable, because I didn't know, because I didn't know, I really didn't know what I was doing. So over these last 10 years, I would say, and I'm comfortable saying this, that I'm a much better musician now than I was then. I mean, if anybody's been a Mykki Blanco fan since 2012, if they were just to listen to this 9-track EP that I just released this summer in June, yeah, it's way better, because I've gotten way better, because I've had this learning curve. I kind of learned what I was doing, and I learned how to do it for myself. So I mean, yeah, you just can't. I just feel like you can't nitpick your own trajectory. And I think, no, and I'm sorry, I'll close it out with this question. And I think the coolest thing for me is that a lot of people consider me, okay, a queer pioneer in hip hop, right?
Definitely.
And so, a lot of people that are usually considered a pioneer, a lot of people will make comments like, oh, well, so-and-so was a pioneer, but they never got their due. Or, so-and-so was a pioneer, but we never gave them their roses. And I think that what's really cool about me is that I'm a pioneer where, this November, I'm about to start releasing music from my second full-length album, and I'm gonna get to be someone who benefits from the atmosphere that I helped create.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, we can applaud that, please. Yeah, I'm really interested in the way that you speak about how you started your journey in the music industry because the way you describe it sounds almost like you stumbled into it. Could you touch a little bit more on that?
Okay, after I realized that I wasn't a very good sculptor, that I wasn't a very good painter, um, I started to focus more on my writing, which is something that I had done since I was a child, and which was always really encouraged. And when I did share my writing, people always responded in a positive way. So, after I, realized I was a bad sculptor and a bad painter, I started to focus more on my writing. And so I ended up having an art gallery publish a poetry book of mine. And this poetry book was called From the Silence of Duchamp to the Noise of Boys. And so when I did this poetry book, I needed to figure out a way that I was going to kind of get people to listen to my poetry because I've never liked, and I can say this, I've never liked the slam poetry style. I've always thought it was quite generic. And so I wanted to think of an interesting way to present my poetry. So I was really inspired by like Patti Smith, and I was really inspired by like this 1970s group from New York called Suicide. And so I started, to use GarageBand on my Mac laptop, and I started to make these little industrial kind of like techno ambient loops. I started to read my poems kind of like songs over this kind of like, ambient noise. And then I kind of teamed up with my friend who was a bassist and my friend who was a drummer. And, we had a little punk band for a bit, a noise band where I was doing my poetry lyrics like this. And then one day, during the summer, I'll never forget, it was at the height of the Little Kim and Nicki Minaj feud, when Nicki was really, really taking over. And I had this idea for a video art project, and it was going to be like in this really like diary style where it was going to be about a teenage girl who wanted to be a famous female rapper. And so Little Kim had a character named Kimmy Blanco, and Nicki Minaj was Nicki Minaj, and my name is Michael. My real name is Michael, and so I thought Kimmy Blanco. I thought Michael, Mykki, and so I spelled it Mykki Blanco. And so at first, the project didn't involve, any music. It was me for the first time dressing up completely, as femme, and just speaking directly to the camera and talking about my day and talking about school and talking about Drake and Rihanna, and so it was very much this kind of like diary video art style. Then kind of a friend of mine said, if Mykki is supposed to want to be a rapper, then you have to make, for the project, you have to make rap songs. So literally simply because of that, I got back on my GarageBand on my Mac laptop, and I started to kind of make more rap sounding weird little beats that were like only like a minute long, and I started rapping. And I ended up kind of being really comfortable rapping because I had been writing poetry. And it kind of was just a different muscle. And then, I was getting all this feedback from people that was like, oh my God, like this rap is so good. And what happens when you get positive feedback from people, you keep doing something. But little did I know that kind of the creation of this caricature was really the birth of my trans identity. Because there was one day, and I'll never forget this day, I had previously only been, presenting as femme and dressing up in the house, and only doing it for the project. And one day, and I don't know why, and I still don't know why, one day I decided to get dressed up, and I went outside, and I didn't do the project. And I'll never forget kind of like, I got such a spectrum of reactions from people. It was from people smiling at me in this really friendly way, to people screaming at me,
What did it feel like that day?
no, well, it was, I had never, it felt like, I always say, I always say it almost felt like the opening of Pandora's box, but instead of monsters coming out, it was like butterflies and like this like, oh, kind of like moment. And I remember, like, I mean, if you look at any old pictures, when I was that age, I was quite cute. So,
Still are.
and it was, and then things happened that day that never happened to me, and it was like, never happened to me as a little gay boy, especially, I remember men held doors open for me that day, and like, and for the first time, like, some women looked at me in a friendly way, some women looked at me in an evil way, like, just this day was nuts. And it was the first time that I was like, okay, there's something that I'm feeling here and I don't know what it is. And then from that day, without explaining it to anyone or myself, I slowly just kind of began to present as femme. And there were friends of mine, when we talk about community, there were friends of mine that had grown up in the ballroom scene. Mm-hmm. And they really, really nurtured me at this time. And it was kind of interesting because, especially when I think of them, they didn't make me explain, and they didn't make me explain why I was doing it. They didn't make me explain myself. They just kind of let me be. And then they kind of, introduced me to other, trans people, mostly, trans people who were identifying as male to female. And I just remember, like, all of a sudden feeling like, okay, I thought I was this, it's like I had gone as a child, just, assuming, like, most, well, I don't want to make a generalization, but, I had kind of had it, like, knocked into my head that I liked girls. And then, at like 13 years old, I realized that wasn't true. And then now, at the age of like 25, I was like, I thought I had this figured out. I thought I was gay. And then, like, all of a sudden I was like, maybe.
More layers.
So that was that. And, it's taken me a very long time, and I would say it was actually the help of other trans people. I mean, especially people. I mean, there's a poet and activist and artist that's really well known, and their name is Alok V. Menon.
Yes.
And so I would say that one of the things that I've always tried to foster is this really open dialogue with my fans and with my audience, because at the end of the day, like, we're all queer people and we're all kind of a certain kind of queer people, right? And so I've always tried to kind of foster this dialogue where, for me, it's not this hierarchy of like, I'm the artist and you're the fan, especially when it comes to like psychological, real deal issues that we all go through. And, it was through the help of people like my fans, through other artists like Alok and the posts that they've made and the conversations that they've had in public over the years, that really helped me understand that, like, my trans narrative didn't have to look like anyone else's. Mm-hmm. And that my trans narrative didn't have to be this kind of like cookie cutter narrative that is sold to the heterosexual cisnormative community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's kind of that.
So then it seems like your journey in terms of your own understanding of your own gender has been very symbiotic with your journey as an artist and especially as a musician. How has that been to be, I think, also on a path that is quite vulnerable and open to public scrutiny? How have you handled that?
Well, I would say that at 35, I'm very, very conscious of it now. And I think there's this element to when you're younger where you do a lot of things unconsciously, and then you have to learn from them, right?
No.
And so there are so there's so many things I would probably not have shared online now that I shared then. But like I said, I shared them then because I realized these people who are my quotation marks fans are also cool people. They're also people that are more knowledgeable about certain things than I am. They're also people that sometimes, in certain contexts, are much smarter than I am. And they're people that have journeys that I can learn from. So sometimes when I would share certain things, and I would get a certain kind of response, it was really helpful, right? It was really helpful. It made me feel secure. It made me feel seen. It made me feel as if what I was going through personally, was okay. And then other times, when you get trolled, or when you say something a bit awkward, or when you do something a bit awkward, and you kind of see that other side to the internet, you realize that, maybe I should have just like asked someone in person, or maybe this was really a conversation that was in my head that didn't need to be talked about out loud, you know. But some of the things that I've decided to share, like the fact that I was HIV positive, undetectable, some of the conversations that I had, like when I was raging on Twitter that day about the fact that outlets like Out and Attitude and The Advocate had never had a person in the, or not, I don't want to say never because that's very wrong, but we're not putting people of color on the cover of their magazines. And we started that hashtag Gay Media So White that literally months later led to actual people of color in editorial positions being hired and whole entire shifts happening at magazines as a part of this wave. When I think about moments like that, where like me speaking up was the beginning of kind of also this kind of shared moment with other people, like, aha, like you're right. And now this other person is going to join the conversation and bring their perspective. And this other person is going to join this conversation, and this activist and that person. And now all of a sudden you have this sea of people where the conversation is unavoidable, and then all of a sudden something happens. When I think about those moments, I'm glad that I was not afraid of my vulnerability, and that it kind of just made me tough.
Yeah, because I can imagine that in an industry such as the music industry that is still largely dominated by cishet white guys, that you may run into, at best, confusion, at worst, violence, and especially with you being the pioneering kind of person that you are. How have you dealt with obstacles and opposition in that industry? How have you broken through those barriers?
Well, one of the biggest huge, like, is my career over moments was probably when I came out in 2015 as being HIV positive, undetectable. And I don't think that anyone in my context had ever done that in the way that I did that. So no, I was definitely not the first person in the music industry to come out as being HIV positive. No, I was definitely not the first person in hip hop. But in the context in which I did it, and at that time period, I don't think anyone had done it, period, in a few years. And I don't think that anyone kind of ever did it like I did it at that point in my career. And so it was very scary because I made that decision for me. There are so many people who could probably argue, you never needed to make that public. You never had to. That was always your choice. That could have been your personal choice forever. But I did it because I was young. And I did it because it was really, really psychologically starting to mess up my life. It's like I was dating people and asking them to keep a secret, and also I was so depressed by it. And also I knew that also this was another thing, like I knew that there were HIV positive people that were very healthy, that had adopted children, that were people that had very successful careers. These people just didn't work in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
And so, I thought, well, you know what? And I remember thinking, well, if I come out about this and that ends my career in music, I'll do something else. I'll become a journalist, or I'll focus, back on art in a performance context. Or, I've always been an ambitious person, so I always will have a backup plan. But what I discovered was that people were way more compassionate than I thought. And the people that needed to float out of my career, out of my life, did. And the people that really needed to embrace me and support me did. And I remember there was this kind of 6-month period where, journalists were really horrible. It wasn't like Mykki Blanco, rapper, musician. It was HIV positive rapper Mykki Blanco. And I would come out with a project, I would come out with something, and they would always attach that byline, always, always, always. And I remember telling my management, I was like, you know what? There's gonna be one day when these journalists do that, and it's gonna feel petty, and it's gonna feel not relevant anymore, and it's gonna feel stupid, and it's gonna make them look bad. And when that day comes, I'll kind of be free of that association in a way. And that day did come. And so, if anything, I've learned that you have to have a certain level of perseverance to be an artist in this career. And this happens usually over time, you develop a thicker skin about certain things. I just think that it's important that you realize that you need to put on that armor sometimes, but that you don't let that armor consume you. Because your silence, your vulnerability, your peace, in my opinion, these are the things that your creativity comes from. And I would say another thing that really helped with these obstacles, and this might be a boring answer, but I feel like queer people need to hear this. I feel like people of color need to hear this. And I feel like young artists always need to hear this. I was able to be successful because I realized how to make money work for me. And that was important because I faced so much homophobia and transphobia in the States. And so when you become a musician, you have your manager, but then you get what's called a booking agent. And a booking agent only works in a certain territory. So, if you start doing well at your concerts and selling them out, and you get some attention, you can have a booking agent in multiple territories. So as soon as I figured this out, and as soon as I was getting some pushback from the United States, I got a booking agent in Europe, I got a booking agent in South America, and I got a booking agent in Asia. And I toured the entire world 3 times, selling out shows, financially supporting myself, making my own economy, because I was not going to let the homophobia and the transphobia in America keep me. I was not going to allow the homophobia and the transphobia in the United States to keep me from being financially stable or successful. And what ended up happening is that financial stability enabled me to come to the States and have people look at me differently, and have them kind of consume my artistry differently. But I always think that fact is very important because people like to have these talks and they like to only talk about the creative side, or they only like to talk about, the emotions or the trauma. And people need to understand that financial security is one of the most important things to your spiritual and your creative well-being.
Yes. Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. I think that's definitely a truth that some of us need to digest. I have a million more questions for you, but I would like to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. Anybody have any questions? Please raise your hand. Oh. Okay, well, you're very shy. Okay, I see one in the front here. Would you please bring over the mic? Here, this person, this person. Yeah, ask your question, baby.
I actually wanted to ask.
Mykki, can you hear? I'll just repeat the question.
Also yell at me.
Yeah, yell it to me, yell it to me.
Okay.
So I actually wanted to ask, how do you also deal with this economic side of being an artist as well? Like the advice you just gave also like really personally resonates.
So the advice you just gave about the economic sides of being an artist really personally resonate with him. He's my friend, he's a DJ. Continue.
But I was actually wondering, how do you also deal with getting booked at like a venue that doesn't have a crowd that will vibe to your music in the same way that like a queer POC crowd would, or getting booked at places where you're kind of like, I need the money.
So then how do you deal with being booked at places where you know the crowd is not going to respond to or interact with your music in the same way that queer POC people would, but you need the money? Oh, he just got a mic. He just got a mic.
I can hear him. I can hear him.
Oh, okay, great.
Well, yeah, that's kind of just my question. Like, how do you also deal with trying to also be strategic about the fact that sometimes you just need the fucking money, even if there is like a white, straight, cis-het crowd?
Well, that's a really simple. I mean, that to me is like a really simple answer, which is not every gig is a cool gig.
Period.
Not every gig is a cool gig. There are corporate things that I've done and that I do that are not very cool, but they facilitate me being able to take other opportunities. They facilitate me being able to take residency opportunities. So I think that unless you are going to take a very staunch stance against kind of like this decaying capitalist society that we live in, not every gig is going to be a cool gig. And I think that you just have to, weigh the lesser of two evils. Now, I will say this, there are gigs that I have pulled out of when I found out there were certain political alliances that I just could not be aligned with. And I think that's a bit of a different scenario. But yeah, honey, not every gig's a cool gig.
Anybody else who has a question? No? Okay, well then I can continue with my long list of things I'm very curious about. Sorry? Oh, okay, good. All right. My bestie here in the front just asked you a question, and when this was posted online, so many of the people in my community here in Rotterdam all got tickets, and I think that's because you're a huge inspiration to us. And I was really wondering, who's your inspiration? Who are the people that you look up to and say they paved the way for me?
Okay, well, I'll name some like classic people, and then I'll name some contemporary people. For me, I'm so cheesy, but like I'm so cheesy, but like I love like people like Tina Turner, Beyonce, Iggy Pop.
I love.
But then when I really think about someone's artistry, obviously, I love someone like David Bowie, even if Bowie stole some of the time, I do love someone like David Bowie. There are certain aspects of Madonna's career I'm not so thrilled about, but I do like the way that she just really took it sometimes, and literally sometimes she did just take it. Mm-hmm. But there is a certain fragility that I think people have these days that I think you just have to be a bit tough sometimes. When I think about people like Vaginal Cream Davis, who was a huge inspiration of mine, who like was, I mean, not afraid to be a punk, black, weirdo, queerdo from the end of the 70s through all of the 80s with their video art career, into the cabarets that they hosted, the various bands. Like, when I think about someone like Kathleen Hanna, when I think about someone, like Missy Elliott in her early days, who was, writing, producing, getting these budgets and tearing them apart. When I think about contemporary people like director Wu Sang, who's someone that I know, but who I really believe is a genius, and whose genius shines through so much of the video work that they do. When I think about people like Deb Hines or, Kelsey Liu, who I'm huge fans of, who I've gotten the chance to collaborate with. Like, I think Liu is just like, I'm always floored. When I think about somebody like Yves Tumor, who I know very well, Sean has always been one of the most talented people that I know. And to see him really doing his thing in the way that he's doing it, I'm like just floored. I mean, I'm so happy for them. I really like Young Lean. I think Young Lean is super talented. I think that the way that Lean plays with music and his artistry, and also the products, and I've spent some time with Lean. Actually, I spent kind of like Christmas a little bit of last year with Lean, and Lean is really sharp. When I think about people like Juliana Huxtable, who, the way that she is able to navigate discourse with music, with her contemporary art practice. Like I said, someone like Alok, who, helped me, in really hardcore emotional ways, but who as an artist is someone that I really admire. I think that's what's so cool about right now, is that we have a lot of contemporary people that are doing really exciting work, and really good work. And it's funny because there are some times when I see people on Instagram, or when I see people now on Twitter, whatever, and I see them kind of talking about things that I talked about, 10 years ago, and maybe they're more articulate, and maybe now more people are listening. But it becomes this interesting thing for me, where I think, maybe I just should have talked about this like 10 years later, But then, it's like, when you're evolving as an artist, you have certain themes and certain concepts in your body. When I think about my earlier work, when I think about this release that I just came out with, like in my earlier work, I think I would have never, made or attempted to make, love songs that were, really emotional. I have a song on the release that came out this summer. It's called Trust. And the lyrics are, what do you see when you look at me? What do you think when you blink and you cannot breathe? I cannot leave. The feeling is inconclusive, so elusive, borderline damn abusive. Hold my heart while you hold my hand. These situations we cannot plan. Faith in me, shorty, faith indeed. Let's be one, no forsaking me. I do bad, you do bad too. You point at me, I point at you. Silly shit, it's not the vision. Crash collision, God my witness. God, I'm in this, trust I'm with this. No bad business, I'm straight up. I can't front on the one I love. A different high. Yo, it ain't no buzz, it must be love, it must be trust. I've never written more emotional lyrics. And so, it's like, to a certain extent, I think when you really trust, and I would say this, I'm someone, I really trust the divine flow of creativity. I genuinely believe in it, and I truly trust it. And I think that when you are trusting this divine flow, you can't control what comes out of you. You know what I mean? So it's like I guess it's like sometimes I have these little moments where I think maybe I should say something edgy, or maybe I should now everybody's talking about this. I talked about this 5 years ago, nobody was listening. Maybe I should talk about it again. Sometimes I have these little thoughts, but I never act on them because they would be inauthentic to who I am now. And so it's like, maybe I said it and nobody was listening, but somebody was, and maybe nobody remembers, but that is still a part of me. And the fact that people are listening now, and the fact that culture is ready for these conversations, the fact that we have a brown-skinned pop star named Little Nas X.
Oh my God, yes.
Like, the fact that this moment exists, it allows me on my own trajectory, on my own divine flow, to just continue to be. And I think that is extremely a gift.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I think it's so nice, so tender to hear you speak also about those people that are your fans that you've been able to connect to in this whole journey of your artistry. And I was wondering, as somebody who travels a lot, before we went live, we were talking about you were in London, you were here, you were there, you were all over Europe, all over the globe. How do you find community and connection when you're constantly on the road?
Well, what was so cool about when I first started was that at all the shows, I first started when I was 25. So for like a good, I would say 5 years, like everybody was the same age. So I would say for like a good 5 years, I would play a show and then I would just hang out with my fans because we were all the same age. And that's how I ended up making so many friends all over the world. And then, everybody tells me that if you get older and your fans get younger, that's a good thing. But as I've gotten older, my fans have gotten younger. So now that dynamic doesn't exist anymore. I mean, sometimes I will play a show, there will be older people there that'll invite me out, or people that are like, 26 plus, and I'll go, right? But, it's like, no, I'm not going to go have a drink with like the 23-year-olds. You know what I mean? It's just it's just like not going to happen. But what I think is cool is that, these people are still, in following them on Twitter or having that conversation after the show, or, it's like I'm still able to engage with people in this real way that allows me to maybe, keep a pinky or keep a toe in youth culture in an authentic way, because it's like, no, like, I'm not gonna make a song about taking Molly anymore. Like, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna talk about the things that I talked about when I was 25. It's just not gonna happen because doesn't mirror my life. But I do think that it's important to be a contemporary artist because you always need to be responding to what's happening, I think, right now and in the world around you in your own way. And so it is nice to have younger fans because, I can, like I said, like dip my pinky, and know, oh, like, this is what you guys are listening to, like, besides me. Oh, like that person's doing that. Oh, this is like this new wave of music. Oh, cool. And I can digest it and it's not this like culture vulture dynamic because I don't think I could ever do that. And one of the things that you have to accept is that like one day you will age out, one day you just will not know, one day you just won't know. And then when people come, they'll be coming for you. And it'll be okay that you don't know, you know what I mean? Because, you kind of stay true to your own artistry. But, I mean, but that day is quite a far long day for me.
Clearly.
Clearly.
Wow, yeah. I think it's so interesting, this idea of being able to have community around the world, and even though you might not be on the ground in the trenches with everybody, you can still dip your pinky in. I was wondering how, especially with your background as an anarcho-feminist punk, in building community, how do you envision resolving conflict? Because of course we step into, and in my experience as well, we step into our queer communities with the best intentions of creating safer spaces, of holding space for each other, but we're all human beings and there's going to be conflict at some point. How do you envision methodologies or whatever for resolving those things or dealing with those things?
I mean, I guess what the first thing that comes to mind, I guess, are just two things. Is I guess one is that, you know, I used to be a very, very, very confrontational person, and I was mostly confrontational, probably because I felt like in my younger years, people took advantage of me when I was fragile. And when I found that inner power, at first it got a bit exaggerated and outsized because I realized, oh wait, I can stand up for myself. And, you know, and then that kind of became this, instead of standing up for myself, it became at times a bit combative. Now, I would also argue that since most people are so unconfrontational, it aided me in that, you know, I was able to achieve or get what I wanted because I wasn't afraid to speak up for myself. And I wasn't afraid to talk about uncomfortable things like money. And I wasn't afraid to, you know, if I felt like I was being mistreated or there was homophobia or transphobia, I would call it out. Now, I've softened a bit in a way where now I really like to watch. Now I really like to watch things play out. You know, I really like to, rather than say something to cue someone up, I'd rather watch how they naturally move. I'd rather watch how they naturally respond and then respond to that. Because most issues sometimes, you know, if you kind of take this more almost of this like voyeuristic stance and kind of watch them play out, they play out by themselves. You know, if somebody mistreats you, you know, of course, you know, talk about it, speak up. But what you'll often find is that the same person that will mistreat you will mistreat other people. And pretty soon, whatever situation has come to light will really play out in the public sphere. And I think the other thing that I would say is this, I'm talking about community. I think that sometimes, especially as queer artists, other queer artists can assume that the crux of our work has to do with identity. And I think that sometimes other queer artists, you know, within our community, we can ghettoize ourselves into the boxes of identity because we're not allowing someone else's work to exist on other merits. And I think that this is an issue because I think that cis hetero artists, they never get confronted with these questions. You know, they never get ghettoized in this way. And, you know, and so to a certain extent, I do believe that the politics of one's identity, and not even the politics, but, you know, the authenticity, the truism of it, the altruism of it is very important. But I think that what has happened is that sometimes there is a certain invasiveness that other people feel with queer artists, a certain comfortability to ask them questions about their gender or their sexuality in a way where people just assume because you're a queer artist, you're going to be down to talk about that. Or just assume that, of course I'll be open to talk about this, or of course that. And I think that that invasiveness needs to kind of come into check because people and communities are being ghettoized. And I think that that's kind of lame. And I don't really know how to come out of that because this also has to do with this mirroring of this shift in acceptance and this mirroring to people, you know, wanting to understand and trying to understand. So I don't really have an answer to how to fix that because I think it also kind of mirrors this cultural sea change.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see what you're talking about. I think it's also having to do with, for a lot of queer people stepping into whatever professional space they're stepping into, they're usually the first for like a straight person to have met this trans person, this gay, this lesbian person, whatever. So I think maybe it'll take a few years for the shift to come where the first words out of your mouth don't have to be an explanation to who you are and that you get to be who you are.
I think that Oprah Winfrey also kind of put it very bluntly one time. She said, sometimes people just gotta die.
Okay.
And I think what she really meant was sometimes when we're talking about these cultural shifts, these generational shifts,
Yeah.
we're talking about certain levels of acceptance, certain political shifts. I think what she really meant was, sometimes just a generation, with certain ideologies, with certain rigid ideologies, just has to kind of naturally pass away.
Yes. I'm just looking into the audience to see if there's really nobody who would like to use the opportunity to ask Mykki Blanco. Oh, all the way in the back. Because looking at the time, I see that we're going to have to come to a close soon, and I think it's a wasted opportunity. People, we're talking to the Mykki Blanco, and you have no questions?
You asked all the questions. Yeah, you did really well.
Oh, thank you. I did my homework.
Hi, my name is Evelien. I have a question about religion. What is your opinion about it?
About religion?
And also how it is put in the queer community.
Okay, so I think that I'm a super spiritual person, so I've never been kind of afraid of religion. I mean, I think that organized religion exists in a way for certain people who need it, who need the structure, who believe in it, who believe in the structure. I would say this, and this is what I'm kind of excited about by this question. I think that for a long time, because organized religion, really was anti-gay, anti-lesbian, I think that, a lot of gay people really shied away from religion and from spirituality for very valid reasons. What I think is really kind of cool about certain generations of queer people and people who kind of really do identify as queer and not just gay and maybe don't necessarily align with certain cisnormative ways of being. What I think is really cool is that it seems like in more queer communities, spirituality is okay. It doesn't feel like an outlaw conversation anymore. I think that people kind of discover their own paths, or sometimes their own rituals, or I think people do what's comfortable for them. You might be raised Catholic and you might disagree with a majority of what the Catholic Church teaches, but you might go to Mass when you need to meditate. Or you might go to Mass when you need that sense of solace, no matter what the religion actually teaches. You know what I mean? So I think people find their own unique paths, but I do think that it's really cool that I feel like a younger generation, and I would say probably the last 20 years, maybe not even that younger, but I say that I think it's cool because I definitely, as someone who in this context is younger, I definitely know that for gay people, kind of religion was this big no-no because they were the ones that were going to hell. They were being damned. They were the ones that God hates fags. So I definitely see culturally why many gay people are not as religious as perhaps certain queer people who are more open to entertaining those beliefs or those practices.
I'm sort of wanting to piggyback off of that question because I think it's really interesting to think about a relationship with spirituality for queer people of color, especially those who have backgrounds of being formerly colonized. Me, for example, I have an Afro-Caribbean background, and I'm really trying to explore this ancestral, pre-colonial knowledge of our spiritual practices and our knowledge. But at the same time, I notice that when I try to step into those spaces, there is a lot of resistance, or I have to kind of leave aside that part of me that is queer. So I'm really wondering for you, what are the places where you look for inspiration, for spiritual connection? Where do you find these things?
So there is a writer that I really, really, really love, whose name is, and he was also a Sufi teacher. His name is Hazrat Inayat Khan. And he has this book called The Mysticism of Music, and then, The Mysticism of Sound and Music. And then he has another book, he has many books, but these two are the ones that I like, The Mysticism of Sound and Music. And then he has a book called The Inner Life. And, I mean, my father is a psychic, and he's not like a predictive psychic. Like my dad's like not gonna tell you like when you're gonna like get like a big check or something. But he's like I would say he's like a psychological, like therapeutic psychic. So like my dad will kind of like talk to your higher self and like give you advice about certain paths you should take in your life, or this or that kind of thing. And so anyway, or what qualities you should nurture, to get through a certain period, or where, just this kind of thing. Anyway, so I feel like, I don't know, like I feel like there's certain traditions like Sufism, especially this Hazrat Inayat Khan who brought Sufism to the West. And, I think like when I read like the ecstatic poetry of Rumi, or when I even think about things like kind of like Taoism, I think that for me, like those have kind of always been like areas where I felt a lot of kind of like freedom. And then there's kind of also this like kind of like new agey spiritual aspects that I'm really into, like, interdimensionality, like Reiki, light healing, the soul's journey, the soul's evolution, this kind of thing, ultra, no. I would say interdimensionality. So, I mean, like, yeah, I can get pretty new agey.
Wow, I actually have like 1,000 more questions to ask you, and especially now that you opened this whole Pandora's box. But unfortunately, we're going to have to end the interview here. I really want to thank you so much for sharing this time with us. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your wisdom, and it was really truly a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, I honestly, seeing you guys there and seeing you there moderating, I really feel like, oh well, wow, like maybe I could have been there in person, but but again, I guess we should.
Next year, yeah, same time, same place. Next year.
Yeah, we just didn't know, but I want to thank you so much for actually asking such, like someone in the audience said, you asked such insightful questions.
Thank you.
Yes, such insightful questions. And now I just want to thank you all so much.
Great. Well, this was our panel. Thanks again to Mykki, Blanco, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Good night.